The Centurion Project, written by the 8th Day of Night. Chapter 7. The New Guard. Journal entry. Day. Bite me. 870. All work and no play makes me a dull boy, but any play makes me a dead boy. Is it better to be dull or dead? I should ask Jimmy. He's been swimming in the swimming hole for hours. He can hold his breath for a very long time. The concrete must help. I'll fish him out before he gets wrinkly. Make sure he knows I'm not going to ground him for stabbing me in the hand.
Are you honestly trying to convince my sister and I you've sustained these injuries during a quote, human cultural sharing ritual?
Luna asked in disbelief. Elias couldn't blame her. It wasn't his most believable lie, but he had few options. The best lies were small and contained in a measure of truth. There was no semi-honest answer, and would dismiss the bandages on his legs and neck. I am trying to convince nobody of anything, Elias responded blankly, meeting her eyes with a bored stare. You asked what happened. I answered. I've been hurt much worse sharing my culture with other humans. These are glory wounds. Nothing I haven't suffered before. Luna turned her glare on Nightshade, who was standing at a rigid attention, her face blank as she tried not to sweat. Elias frankly enjoyed watching the ponies back up his lie with their silence. He had no doubt one, if not both, would talk to the princesses in private to tell the truth, but right now, they were following him blindly. He could say anything, and they would agree. They were in far too deep to back out now.
Is this all true, Captain? You were merely sharing cultures with our guest?
Luna asked accusingly. Nightshade wisely remained silent, and Elias let her suffer for a moment before cutting in and clearing his throat. The Blue Princess glared at him as he spoke. Princess, it is tradition for none of the participants to speak of the cultural sharing. It's meant to be a rather intimate ritual between... Elias paused as he tasted the word in his mouth. He didn't like it, and even as he said it with a calm voice, friends. Twilight groaned and slammed her head into the table.
I can't believe I missed out on more human culture. I'm missing all the good stuff.
She had been surprisingly open to conversation with Elias about his outburst. She had offered a tentative apology, which Elias had accepted at the prodding of Steel's scalpel. He made sure to add the condition to steer clear of any subjects he didn't wish to discuss, but he promised to tell her as much as she could, fulfilling his deal with Nightshade. The Thestral had grinned at him mockingly before she had drawn Luna's ire. Said ire, which was now being thrown around the room as Luna tried to pry the truth from the human and the two closed-lipped ponies. As he had assured the two ponies, the princesses couldn't disprove his statements, and with the silence of their subjects, along with the occasional groan from Twilight, they were forced to concede. Elias could tell neither of them were happy about it, with Luna pointedly glaring at all three subjects while Celestia simply frowned in disappointment, looking primarily at Scalpel and Elias.
Very well,
the white unicorn said slowly.
If you are sure that nothing negative has happened, we can move along to other matters, though I will be talking to each of you individually to ensure that all is truly well. I have no wish for grudges amongst my subjects.
Elias wanted to point out that he didn't really fit into that category, but he tactfully remained silent. He had no desire to have the princesses find out the truth immediately, and being overly mouthy would only lead to more pressure. It would be better to let the events fade from memory a little before they could figure out the truth. He shifted his weight between his feet, his legs aching as a dull pain began to set in. While he had no doubt that Luna would enjoy watching him suffer, Celestia seemed to notice his discomfort, and she gestured toward the empty seats at the cleared table.
Please, let us begin anew. We still have much to discuss this evening.
They all resumed their previous seats, though Elias noticed that both Scalpel and Nightshade scooted their chairs just a bit closer to him. Luna had almost a predatory look on her face as she scanned the faces of the two obvious guilty ponies. Elias' calm, almost bored demeanor acted as a calming agent, however, and the lie was believed. For now.
I believe it would be better for all if we steered our conversation toward the future rather than the past. Agreed?
Celestia said. Everybody responded with silent nods, and Celestia smiled.
Excellent.
She faced Elias directly.
Elias, the events of tonight have only strengthened my resolve to help you.
Elias bit his cheek, suppressing the irritation he could already feel rising in his chest. Although a large part was directed at the ponies for pitying him, a small portion of that anger was directed at himself. Why had he made such a stupid bet? It didn't matter what Celestia said. He would have to accept that or shoot the last bit of character he had left in his face. Elias really didn't like that option. He had tried it once. Never again.
My sister and I have discussed several potential solutions,
Celestia continued.
First, we have already begun researching a method by which to send you back to your world. While we pursue this avenue, you would like to stay as our guest within Catalot Castle, and hopefully we could help you resolve your issue with your emotional distress.
Elias shook his head. I wouldn't waste your time. I was brought here by a freak accident, something called an anomaly. They usually appear after contact with a living creature, so it's likely gone. He shrugged. Besides, I have nothing waiting for me on Earth but pain and death. Celestia inclined her head.
I had surmised as much, but I did not want to assume you would keep you trapped here.
And yet that is exactly where I'll be trapped, Elias thought, biting his tongue. He briefly considered bolting again, but that small voice at the back of his mind yelled at him to keep his word. Elias sometimes wished he could physically slap that voice.
Another solution we have discussed was, a parole of sorts,
Celestia said. Elias raised an eyebrow in response, but Celestia quickly continued.
I am not accusing you of a crime,
she said, trying to allay his fears. Yet, Luna growled. Celestia shot a glare at her before continuing, turning back to Elias.
We merely wish to see if you are compatible with our ponies, though what I am sure is no fault of your own. You have been traumatized, and as such may not realize when you are being too aggressive.
Elias smirked. You could just say that I'm a violent antisocial threat. I don't mind. If I had taken keen self-awareness, I would have gone insane. Humans are supposed to be social creatures. Certain circumstances have made me an outlier. Celestia seemed to hold on to the only social creatures bit. She sat up slightly.
Then this solution may work the best. I would like to send you to Ponyville with Twilight. Once there, she will assist in educating you on pony society. While you are re-socialized, her friends are marvelous ponies, and I'm sure they are more than capable with helping you find peace.
What would I do for housing and food? Elias asked.
Oh, you can stay with me, Twilight said excitedly. We can stay up for hours talking about humans, and you can help me study, and we'll organize the library. I always need an extra pair of hands when tidying up.
Elias felt his eyes twitch as he watched the overly excited unicorn ramble. That solution died quickly in his mind. He had already disliked the notion of being forced into society, but doing so while being at the mercy of Twilight, and that was quickly becoming an obsession of hers, he'd rather not. Elias looked back to Celestia. Did you have any other solutions? I don't think I'm the peaceful library type. Celestia sighed, shaking her head at Twilight's antics.
Indeed, the third solution is for you to take you as a guard here. This solution would allow Dr. Scalpel and Luna to closely monitor and assist your emotional state. You would need to sign a service contract, but your full room and board would be completely covered, along with a stipend paid weekly.
How long would this contract be for? Elias asked, already solidifying his mind which option he would take. If anything else, being a guard would be an excuse to remain constantly armed. He didn't care how peaceful ponies saw themselves. He'd be dead and buried before he walked around without his gladius.
The standard contract is 5 years,
Celestia replied.
Though we could modify yours to be based on your physical and mental state. If both Dr. Scalpel and Luna determine you are emotionally stable, I would have no issue with allowing you to find a different place in our society at your discretion.
Given the look he was receiving from Luna, Elias knew he was going to be stuck with the 5-year contract. He could already sense a grudge forming against him. It was funny, all things considered. What does being a guard entail? He asked, making sure he knew what he was getting into. Nightshade was actually the one to respond, her voice only slightly robotic as she spoke.
It depends on which service you choose, but in some, you would be involved in 12-hour shifts with an assortment of positions. We would need you to ensure that you have complete combat and duty training, but ultimately, you are a watcher, waiting for something to go wrong so you can respond in a quick and efficient manner. While the Guard acts as Equestria's primary military body,
Celestia continued,
it is solely based here in Canterlot and acts more as a peacekeeping force. Most disputes are solved by our ponies themselves, or, in extreme cases, during our day and night courts. It is very rare that any threats require a violent response.
Elias smirked, pointedly looking at Nightshade and Luna. Really? How interesting. Luna scoffed, sticking her nose up in the air.
You are a special case, Elias. My guards attempted to confront you in a non-violent way, and you responded by assaulting them. What followed was merely insurance that you would remain a threat.
Elias shrugged in dismissal. I'm not blaming you. It isn't dissimilar to how I would have responded. Next time, though, please just do me the favor of stabbing me to death. Nearly drowning isn't nearly as fun as it's cracked up to be. Luna pushed back to her seat, her voice rising as she jabbed a hoof at him.
That would not have occurred if you had simply remained in place. Instead, you ran around like a mare in heat with your tail between your legs as you tried to escape.
Elias tilted his head, trying to appear calm when in truth he wanted to laugh. He couldn't be bothered to get angry. This was starting to get kind of fun. He hadn't a good verbal sparring in a while, and it would seem that Luna had a bit of an anger issue. Her buttons were easy to push. Who was he to waste that ideal situation? I was merely making a tactical withdrawal to a better position to fight an unknown enemy that outnumbered me. What would you think when creatures straight out of a storybook came by your campsite and started sniffing your bloody bandages? It isn't my fault your version of the introductions come to a point of sword in the dead of night, Elias responded.
Brought only because you decided to act like a sneaky thief in the middle of the day,
Luna shouted. Elias glanced over to Celestia, who was shaking her head slowly, her face one of exasperation. Evidently, this wasn't the first time this has happened. Elias cocked his head. I apologize for being delirious. I seem to recall having an arrow in my chest. My judgment tends to suffer when I am bleeding my life away. Luna scoffed.
Please, you have a dramatic sense of a fall. If you were truly that injured, you should have approached Ponyville on the main path and received proper medical care. Instead, you ran and cowered like a child.
Elias felt his grin spread across his face. You're accusing me of being a child, yet one of us is shouting at the top of their lungs, in front of their subordinates and sister no less, while the other is a human merely trying to learn more about his new environment. Who would you say is acting childish now, princess? Luna turned beet red, her mouth opened, and Elias heard an impressive intake of air. He braced himself for a shout, but was blindsided when it came from a Celestia instead.
Enough!
She shouted, slamming her forehoofs on the table, nearly upending it. All the ponies jumped. With Elias tried to contain his amusement. This was far too easy. Maybe he did have a place here. A little bit of trouble-making never hurt anyone, and it had been a very long time since he had the opportunity to make himself innocent mischief. Celestia took a deep breath and settled back down in her seat, her face calming visibly as she brought her flash of anger under control. She looked first to her sister, shaking her head slightly as she spoke.
Luna, you should be ashamed of yourself. To be so easily goaded. I thought we had worked on this,
Celestia admonished. Luna looked down as she sat in her chair, occasionally shooting a glare at Elias when she thought nobody was looking. Celestia then looked to Elias and shook her head in disappointment.
As for you, Elias, I cannot pretend to be happy with your words, but I also cannot punish you for them. Do note that should you accept a position in the Guard, such behavior will not be tolerated.
Elias nodded, keeping his face calm as he responded. Of course, Princess. My apologies. I always found a bit of argumentative banter ease tensions.
Why do I severely doubt that?
Scalpel muttered. Celestia gave Scalpel a look that told Elias that she agreed with him, but they all let the subject drop. Calm and dignified once more, Celestia said.
There are 3 Guard branches, though the Royal Guard is off limits until you serve a full year within one of the regular Guard forces, as well as pass a series of exams.
And the other 2? Elias asked. He leaned forward in his slightly, his recently unused curiosity beginning to rise. Elias felt mentally cluttered, like his mind was stuck between 2 points. One he was trying to warn him to remain cautious, to only learn enough to get done and get out. It advised him to drive the ponies away, to remain aloof until whatever service he was due was up, then run as he planned earlier. The other half wanted to relax, to let go of his suspicions so he could learn. It wanted to find a library, to see what books they had. A new world meant new cultures to study, new civilizations. He relished his knowledge of ancient Greek and Roman life, and he really wanted to see how this world stood up in face of human empires. It wanted to joke, to play, to see and experience, all that could have been done by using his chance as a tool for his future interests. Elias decided to lean toward the latter voice. Escape was a solid backup, and remaining aloof would have benefits for keeping certain ponies away. Elias felt his eyes flick to Luna before flicking back to Celestia, but he had an opportunity here. If nothing else, learning more could be used as a weapon. Satisfied with his mental justification, Elias listened carefully as Celestia continued to speak.
The Solar Guard is my personal branch,
she said.
They are led by Guard Captain Shining Armor and operate from dawn till dusk, guarding the daylight hours. It is the largest of the 3 Guard forces, and I'm sure that you wouldn't be able to make many friends if that would be your wish.
Luna, her temper cooled in the moments of passing talk, continued where Celestia left off.
As for the Lunar Guard, it is much smaller force, but no less powerful. You have already met Captain Nightshade, and should you choose this branch, you will act as Guardian of the Night.
She smiled sinisterly.
With me, of course. It will also allow us to get to know each other better.
Elias gave her an unimpressed look before turning back to Celestia. I'm assuming there's some sort of paper I'll have to sign. She seemed to perk up at her seat as her smile brightened.
Are you sure you've already decided? We would be more than happy to allow you to rest for a few more days so that you could think about this. It is no small decision.
Elias shrugged, trying not to look at Nightshade as he spoke. I've already told you myself that I would accept what I could get, and this is going to be the best option. Signing a few years of my life away for peace of mind isn't so bad. I'm young. I'll have plenty of time after. Celestia nodded.
Very well, Elias. I shall have the appropriate documentation prepared before your first training session. Shall I put you down for the Solar Guard, then?
The Lunar Guard, actually, Elias replied calmly.
What?
Luna shouted, her hooves hitting the table. Elias heard Scalpel sigh and saw a small pouch float into Nightshade's waiting hoof, the pony keeping a straight face as she tucked it away in her armor. The motion went unnoticed as Luna began to rant.
This is unacceptable!
she said, pointing at Elias.
You merely wish to be a member of my guard to make a mockery of it, to tarnish its name and uniform. I shall not allow it.
Elias frowned, meeting the seething pony's eyes with his calm ones. I will do no such thing. Though I may forget myself from time to time, I am still a man of my word, and whatever terms and rules your contract has, I shall follow them to the best of my ability. Elias straightened in his seat, erasing the slouch he had been maintaining lazily. I have no interest in bringing your guard to shame, Princess. I shall treat whatever position I am given with the same respect as I would my own legion. If you do not believe me... Elias stood, unsheathing his sword. He flipped it in his hand and offered the hilt to Luna. Then take this, and let's end this farce here and now. I have no interest in being some sort of passive subject, and I will not continue a life lived in shame. If my word isn't valued, then my life lacks meaning. If you do not believe me, take up my sword, and let's talk no more. As he finished, he gently tossed the blade, letting it clatter to a stop just in front of Luna. Her eyes flickered back and forth between Elias's calm face and the sharp blade glistening before her. Elias could see the shock in her eyes, and he imagined that it was mirrored on the faces of the other ponies. The words were a bit melodramatic, as was the action of giving her his sword, but it served its purpose. If nothing else, it was a full commitment that the ponies actually trust him, exactly as he needed to.
Elias, don't...
Luna started. She seemed unable to continue, so Elias gestured to the sword. Princess, for a man, his word is his life. If he does not honor it, he doesn't deserve to live, and is no longer a man. Only those who are insane or cowardly willingly break their word.
And which one are you?
Nightshade asked. Elias shrugged, the motion drawing pain from his arm. He recradled it as he answered. I don't know anymore, he replied simply, but I believe I will soon have an opportunity to figure that out. Nightshade frowned, and Elias could tell she didn't really accept the answer, but she wasn't important right now. Elias looked back to Luna, who was now solely staring at his gladius. I have given you the choice, Princess, he said. My life is now in your hands. That's how much I believe my word is worth. Luna frowned in thought, and Elias could practically see the gears turning behind her eyes. For a split second, Elias thought he could see a smile on her lips. Then a moment passed, and she raised her head, her face a calm mask. The gladius lifted in the air in her blue aura, and Elias watched it spiral through the air.
Are you sure about this, human?
She asked him carefully.
Will you be able to devote yourself to the night, and by extension, me? Your duties shall not be light.
No challenge has put me down yet, Elias replied. I'll do whatever it takes to keep moving forward. The blade settled in the air above his head, its edge pointing down. Luna's eyes were locked with Elias, both of them unflinching.
Will you swear to have no fear? Will you pledge to give your life for others should it become necessary?
Elias smirked. I've already survived my worst nightmares, and therefore I fear nothing. I've been living for myself for a while now. It might be good of a change of pace to die for others. Luna tilted her head slightly, and this time, Elias was sure she had seen a smile. Not in a mocking fashion either, but a genuine smile. Odd.
Very well, then.
The gladius descended swiftly, fast enough that he felt the air cut as it stopped just short of his tunic. Elias didn't so much as blink. The blade gently aligned with his left shoulder, then his right.
I dub thee Guardsman Bright,
Luna said, her tone raising slightly as she made her proclamation.
Official member of the Lunar Guard. Serve thy position well, Guardsman. I shall be watching you closely.
Elias' gladius flipped smoothly in the air, the hilt now facing him. He inclined his head slightly as he took the offered blade, sheathing it quickly. The rest of the ponies stomped lightly, what Elias assumed was their version of clapping. Either way, it made him uncomfortable, and Elias quickly sat back down, supporting his arm once more as he tried to avoid eye contact with all the smiling ponies. He felt his face flush slightly in the embarrassment, and he pushed hard to suppress his emotions. It was supposed to be a display of grit and fortitude, yet the ponies were acting like it was a congratulatory affair was foreign to him. Mostly, he just didn't like the positive attention. His actions seemed to win him the favor of Luna, though, because her glares ceased at him, replaced by a calm mask, hiding her emotions carefully. Nightshade leaned over.
"Stop!"
she whispered in his ear. If you enjoyed today's story, consider liking and subscribing to be informed of any future uploads. This has been Firehearth, and thank you for listening.